Berkeley thinks that skepticism and atheism are two sides of the same coin. He believes that both can be defeated if materialism is refuted in favor of idealism. The connection between these two conclusions is that if we accept a theory of material entities existing independently of mind that are not congeries of ideas existing in a mind, then science has no reason to assume that God exists, and we are in that case metaphysically committed to the existence of entities that we cannot know, because their properties are necessarily hidden from perception. The problem with materialism, according to Berkeley, is that science can, in principle, explain all physical phenomena without making reference to the existence of God. Science, as a rule, adopts a minimalist attitude with respect to the entities that are strictly needed in order to make its explanations work. If we can explain physical events in the material universe without referring to the existence or will of God, then, following the principle of Occam's razor, it would seem to imply that God is unnecessary to science. If that is true, then there's no reason from the standpoint of science as the most complete and correct system of knowledge to accept the existence of God. The linking of the topics of skepticism, atheism, and science in Berkeley's project is revealed in the extensive original title of this book. If we go back to the title page, which is very far from where I am right now, allow me to read three dialogues between Hylas and Philoneus, the design of which is plainly to demonstrate the reality and perfection of human knowledge, the incorporeal nature of the soul, and the immediate providence of a deity in opposition to skeptics and atheists. Also to open a method for rendering the sciences more fully, more easy, useful, and compedious. If natural science, grounded on a materialist metaphysics, offers satisfactory explanations of physical phenomena without making reference to the existence of God, then materialism provides a powerful scientific rationale for atheism as the positive disbelief in God's existence. If we deny materialism and conclude instead with Berkeley's idealism that sensible things exist as congeries of ideas in the mind, then it may be reasonable to suppose that God exists as an infinitely powerful mind that comprehends all sensible things that we can, at best, only partially experience. Science, based on Berkeley's idealist assumptions, requires the existence of God. Natural science, as Berkeley thinks of it, cannot offer explanations of even the most basic physical phenomena without supposing that sensible things exist as congeries of ideas in God's mind, and that what we think of as casual connections in the physical world are God's choices concerning successions of events. We shall need to inquire more closely into the reasons for this conclusion in Berkeley's philosophy. For the time being, it is worth remarking that from Berkeley's perspective, science cannot succeed except on the assumption that God exists. It follows, if Berkeley is right, that science contradicts atheism and skepticism. For these, science must be based on an idealist rather than materialist philosophy. Near the end of Berkeley's three dialogues, in the third dialogue, Philonoos, Berkeley's character, states, but allowing matter to exist, and this is the one in pink in front of you, and the notion of absolute existence to be as clear as light, and this is in page 201 of this text by the Oxford Classics again. Yet, was this ever known to make the creation more credible? Nay, hath it not furnished the atheists and infidels of all ages with the most plausible argument against a creation, that a corporeal substance, which hath an absolute existence without the minds of spirits, should be produced out of nothing by the mere will of a spirit, hath been looked upon as a thing so contrary to all reason, so impossible and absurd, that not only the most celebrated among the ancients, but even diverse modern and Christian philosophers have thought matter co-eternal with the deity. Lay these things together, and then judge you whether materialism disposes men to believe the creation of things. Skepticism is also directly related to materialism in Berkeley's view. Materialism acknowledges the existence of non-sensible things beyond the contents of the mind, and about which the mind literally has no idea. It follows in that case that philosophy is committed to the existence of things that are unknowable. There are entities or parts or aspects of entities that we can never know. If we did know about them, then, Berkeley argues, we can know about them only by virtue of entertaining ideas of their properties, in which case they would once again exist within the mind. The concept of a material entity that exists entirely without or independently of the mind, and does not consist of any idea of or congeries of ideas, is the idea that something that by virtue of everything beyond thought is necessarily unknowable, unexperientiable. A dilemma therefore confronts the idealism-materialism dispute. If we accept Berkeley's idealism, then we must admit the conclusion that sensible things are mental, existing in the mind, as Berkeley says. Berkeley is delighted with this conclusion, but many anti-idealist thinkers find it paradoxical to imagine that physical entities could exist only in the mind, even if the mind in question turns out to be God's. If, on the other hand, sensible things are material in the sense of being non-mental, metaphysically independent existences that do not require or presuppose the existence of any mind, then philosophy is committed to the existence of something for which we can have no empirical evidence. The properties of a material entity must then remain unknowable, inscrutable to perception, and inaccessible to the mind. If there's nothing more to sensible things than the sensible properties experienced by a mind, then the mind can at least in principle have a complete grasp of an entity's properties with no unknowable remainder. In this respect, Materialism entails skepticism in Berkeley's critique, while idealism, in principle, has transparent access to all the properties of any sensible things and need not acknowledge that there is anything inherently unknowable about the existence and nature of physical entities. The dialogue takes place against this background of issues. It begins with Hylas questioning Philoneus about a rumor he has heard, according to which Philoneus is supposed to hold extravagant philosophical conclusions and to be a kind of skeptic. Sorry. Um, didn't go to the page where I wanted it to go. And it's on page 108. And here it is. Ta-da! So as I was saying, it's also important to see how Hylas accuses Philoneus of being a skeptic in the sense of denying the existence of matter on the unexamined but supposedly common sense assumption that matter exists. To reject the existence of anything so apparently indispensable to understanding the nature of the world, Hylas believes is to be guilty of some form of skepticism, to be doubtful about things whose existence is obvious. Philoneus rightly counters that skepticism is more properly a term reserved for those who are doubtful about the existence of anything or about the possibility of any kind of knowledge. With respect to the first meaning of skepticism, Philoneus denies being skeptical in this sense, since he fully acknowledges the existence of sensible things, interpreting them as congeries of ideas, nor is he skeptical about the existence of minds as thinking things that think ideas. As to the second meaning of skepticism, concerning the possibility of knowledge, Philoneus argues that it is Hylas and materialists generally who deny the possibility of knowing sensible things in their entirety. Hylas and Philoneus set the stage for their exchange in this way. I'm glad to find there was nothing in the accounts I heard of you. Pray, what were those? You were represented in last night's conversation as one who maintained the most extravagant opinion that ever entered into the mind of God, of man, to wit, that there is no such thing as material substance in the world. Philoneus replies that there is no such thing as what philosophers call material substance. I am seriously persuaded. But if I were made to see anything absurd or skeptical in these, I should then have the same reason to renounce these that I imagine I have now to reject the contrary opinion. The connection between materialism and skepticism is featured from the beginning of the dialogue. Philoneus admits that if he believed that his rejection of materialism amounted to skepticism, then he would need to rethink his anti-materialism. As things stand, the very opposite is true. Philoneus maintains that materialism entails skepticism, and that far from being a skeptic himself, He denies materialism in order to avoid being skeptical about the possibility of knowledge. Hylas fires back with an astonished counter-assertion that it is skeptical to question the existence of matter. The question turns naturally to a question of matter or meaning of skepticism. It's now in color blue. What can anything be more fantastical, more repugnant to common sense, or a more manifest piece of skepticism than to believe there's no such thing as matter? Philonous replies, softly, good Hylas, what if it should prove that you, who hold their ease, are by virtue of that opinion a greater skeptic, and maintain more paradoxes and repugnancies to common sense than I who believe no such thing? Dispute over the question of who is the greater skeptic one who accepts or who denies the existence of matter, epitomizes the opposition between Hylas and Philonous. Their discussion is pursued at many depths and through many side issues. Philonous first denies being a skeptic and demands that Hylas explains clearly what he means by the concept. He flatly rejects the label if it is taken to mean denying the possibility of knowledge. He rightly objects that if that were the proper meaning of the word, then Hylas, by denying the contrary view that Philonous accepts, would be just as much a skeptic. By denying matter, or the existence of matter, Philonous rather affirms an item of knowledge, namely, that matter does not exist, and so can reasonably be accused of denying the possibility of any and all knowledge. We can read further. And here it is in blue again. How cometh it to pass then, Hylas, that you pronounce me a skeptic, because I deny what you affirm, to wit, the existence of matter? Since for aught you can tell, I am a peremptory in my denial, as you in your affirmation. Hold, Philonous, Hylas replies, I have been a little out in my definition, but every false step a man makes in discourse is not to be insisted on. I said indeed that the skeptic was one who doubted of everything, but I should have added, or who denies the reality and truth of things. What things? Philonous replies. Do you mean the principles and theorems of sciences? But these, you know, are universal intellectual notions and consequently independent of matter. The denial, therefore, of these doth not imply denying them. A skeptic, in the sense of someone who denies the reality of the truth of things, perhaps comes closer to a correct definition of the term. Philonous clearly does not doubt everything or even everything it is possible to doubt in the manner of Descartes in the Meditations before he has disposed of the evil demon hypothesis. Hylas nevertheless accuses him of being a skeptic in the sense of denying things that he, along with every other person of sound judgment, ought to accept. Philonous accordingly denies being a skeptic in this redefined sense also, since he accepts the principles and conclusions of science. He is no opponent of scientific knowledge as such. His quarrel is with what he regards as an extravagant philosophical conjecture. that sensible things are supported by an insensible mind-independent matter, material substratum. Philonoos considers himself as a result to be a true philosophical defender of scientific and religious knowledge against, of course, the skepticism he believes is entailed by materialism. In Berkeley's third dialogue, which you have seen me go through, and on page 164, Philonoos summarizes the debate as it stands after lengthy efforts on Hylas's part to convince Philonoos that matter exists, and by Philonoos to persuade Hylas of the opposite. Hylas maintains a succession of alternative interpretations of the concept of matter in an attempt to make a stronger case for the existence of an underlying material substance as the metaphysical foundation for ideas of the sensible properties experienced in the perception of physical things. Philonoos believes he has refuted every one of these proposals and has thereby exhausted Hylas's ability to sustain the concept of matter against his philosophical objections. The two now say, "Pray, tell me, if the case stands not thus, at first, from a belief of material substance, you would have it that the immediate objects existed without the mind. Then that their archetypes, then causes, next instruments, then occasions. Lastly, something in general, which being interpreted proves nothing. So matter comes to nothing. What think you, Hylas? Is not this a fair summary of your whole proceeding? Be that as it will. Yet I still insist upon it that our not being able to conceive a thing is no argument against its existence." Having reduced Hylas to this precarious conclusion, Philonoos runs through a list of possible interpretations of the concept of matter, all of which Hylas admits are appropriate to his purpose and concerning none of which he thinks it is possible to have knowledge. Trying to make a virtue out of this calamity, Hylas argues that ignorance and skepticism are the proper conclusions of true philosophy. Later again, at the beginning of the third dialogue, he is driven to admit, and we can find this in 169. And let's read this dialogue. It's now in color green in front of you. "There is not that single thing in the world whereof we can know the real nature or what it is in itself." Phineas replies, "Will you tell me I do not really know what fire or water is?" Hylas replies, "You may indeed know that fire appears hot, the water fluid, but this is no more than knowing that what sensations are produced in your own mind upon the application of fire and water to your organs of sense, their internal constitution, their true and real nature. You are utterly in the dark as to that." Philinus replies, "Do I not know these to be real stone that I stand on, and that which I see before my eyes to be a real tree?" Hylas says, "No, no. It is impossible you or any man alive should know it. All you know is that you have such a certain idea or appearance in your own mind. But what is this to the real tree or stone? I tell you that color, figure, and hardness which you perceive are not the real natures of those things, or in the least like them." Hylas, in desperation, clinging still to his commitment to the existence of material substance, declares that we cannot know anything about the real nature of perceived entities. We can only know the ideas that such things produce in our minds. Here again is a perfect statement of the philosophical disagreement between Hylas and Philonous. Hylas begins by accusing Philonous of skepticism, or at least of wondering whether the reports he has heard are true that Philonous is a skeptic who denies the existence of matter. Philonous turns the tables on Hylas by forcing him to admit that it is the materialist rather than the idealist who is driven to skepticism. The materialist believes that there's a hidden aspect to sensible things. The sensible properties of sensible things are perceived, but according to the materialist, there is also supposed to be an underlying material substance or substratum that by definition remains imperceivable and hence unknowable. Hylas tries to promote this consequence of materialism as a philosophical virtue, but Philonous disagrees. Let's read this one in color blue. Hence, the vulgar retain their mistakes, and for all that make a shift to bustle through the affairs of life. But philosophers know better things. You mean they know that they know nothing? Hylas' reply, that is the very top and perfection of human knowledge. To which Philonous replies, but are you all these while in earnest, Hylas? And are you seriously persuaded that you know nothing real in the world? Suppose you are going to write. Would you not call for pen, ink, and paper like another man? And do you not know what it is you call for? There is an echo of Socrates' irony in Philonous' challenge to Hylas concerning the materialist philosophers' superiority of knowledge. Philonous asks in disbelief, of course, whether according to Hylas, materialists have not higher knowledge in knowing that they know nothing. This is much like Socrates' assertion to Plato in Plato's dialogues, interpreting the oracle at Delphi pronouncement that he's the wisest man in Athens in knowing that he does not know, whereas others think they have knowledge but do not really know. Philonous rejects the skepticism implied by materialism. He reaffirms the common sense view that the world is known through perception. He attacks Hylas' materialism because of the skepticism he believes it entails, and reversing the objection with which Hylas originally charged him. And we find that in 171. And it's a very long quote. Let's look at the first part first. You amaze me. Was ever anything more wild and extravagant than the notion you now maintain? And is it not evident you are led into all these extravagancies by the belief of material substance? This makes you dream of those unknown natures in everything. It is this occasion you're distinguishing between the reality and sensible appearances of things. It is to these you are indebted for being ignorant of what everybody else knows perfectly. Nor is this all. You are not only ignorant of the true nature of everything, but you know not whether anything really exists or whether there are any true natures at all. For as much as you attribute to your material beings an absolute or external existence, wherein you suppose the reality consists, and as you are forced in the end to acknowledge such an existence, means either a direct repugnancy or nothing at all. It follows that you are obliged to pull down your own hypothesis of material substance and positively to deny the real existence of any part of the universe. And so you are plunged into the deepest and most deplorable skepticism that ever man was. Tell me, Hylas, is it not as I say? And then Hylas would say, I agree with you. A materialist metaphysics also contributes to atheism. Sorry. To atheism, according to Berkeley and his spokes character Philoneus. Berkeley's attempts to prove the existence of God within his anti-materialist philosophical framework is intended not only as a refutation of skepticism of the sort Hylas is finally completed to admit, but equally as a refutation of atheism. The two positions, anti-skepticism and anti-atheism, are closely linked together in Berkeley's anti-materialism. The argument Philoneus develops is that the world of sensible phenomena, if it is not upheld by an underlying material substratum that is altogether insensible and unknowable, must exist primarily in the infinite mind of God, and only secondarily, partially, and incompletely in our finite minds as we experience sensible things. If Berkeley is right, then all problems of metaphysics and epistemology boil down to the fundamental opposition between sensible things as material or ideal. The world of experience either has an unknowable material substratum or it does not. If the world has an unknowable material substratum, then skepticism is entailed, and there's no need to bring the concept of God into scientific explanations of physical occurrences. If sensible things consist only of ideas in the mind, whether God's mind or ours, then the universe, in all its properties, is in principle knowable, so that refuting atheism is equally a refutation of skepticism. If you'd like to continue reading Berkeley's three dialogues between Hylas and Philoneus, please check the playlist. If you haven't subscribed, liked, or shared this post, please do so to sustain this channel. Thank you very much for your support. This is Samo't sa Simula. Thank you very much.